Welcome, everyone, to Santa's Guide to Breaking into Buildings. There's just the one reference to Santa, and that's it. That's just that's the whole. As Barry said, my name is Bakhti-Suroosh. I go by Ari to most people. I'm a security consultant at Optiv with attack and penetration testing. I do have my bachelor's degree in information security from University of Richmond, and my specialization has become, over the years, physical security and social engineering. And if anyone wants to connect with me on Twitter, it is at Pursuit of Root.
Hi, everyone. My name is Savannah and Lazzara. I'm one of the technical managers on the attack and pen team. Also, I work with Barrett with the Red Team Village as one of the co-leads. And then I'm one of the Tampa ambassadors for Hack the Box. And then on our attack and pen team, I'm also one of the operators for our adversary simulation team. So we do the red teams, insider threats, and engagements like that. I also have my OSCP, and feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, lasslayer. Kind of going into the agenda, these are kind of the things that we are going to be discussing today. We're going to kind of go through like client expectations, remote reconnaissance, on-site reconnaissance, initial access, authenticated entry into a building, and then kind of post-exploitation and discuss other items as well.
Yeah, if you were expecting a little bit more, story kind of narrative related, this is a little bit more methodology, which I've come to find a little bit more interesting. And then we can kind of talk about stories as they come up. But the first stage is always going to be discussing client expectations, where you're getting ahead and trying to set expectations on your side, but also trying to get an idea of what are their criteria of success. What are their limitations? Those are arguably a little bit more important at times. And so what you're really looking for is to get out ahead and discuss the methods of access that are in scope. You're discussing what evidence do they want to be collected as, to symbolize whatever impact you demonstrated. What kind of hours are in scope? Most of the time it's 24/7, and that's something that we really try to push for because we want the flexibility and to kind of figure out when the best way to get in is. But sometimes those are limited hours and they only want during the day or during the night. And then, of course, what interactions with employees are considered in scope? What do they have an issue with? And then, of course, like I said, on your side, you're trying to get ahead and really set expectations as to what you're going to be trying to do. And, also take away some of the nervousness where you're not going to damage anything. There's one exception, but we'll talk about that. But for the most part, you're trying to make them feel better about it because oftentimes there's a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunications about what it is that you're going to be actually doing. And so, of course, the two most valuable pieces of paper you're going to get there is the LOA, the letter of authorization. That's the most important, followed by, if they do not own the building, the third-party consent form. For whatever reason, that's a really sticky document to get a hold of. That's a tricky one, and a couple of different engagements have been pushed as a result of trying to get a hold of that one. But those are the two most important ones. We usually at Optiv make sure that we have both of those documents before we jump on the plane. We won't board the flight without those documents. Some of you might recognize the image that we have here, the letters of marque, the cool letters of marque and reprisal. That's the image I put there because that's arguably, and don't pin me down on this, I'm no historical major, but the letters of marque and reprisal were kind of history's first salve. That was the letter that privateers were given so that they had permission to raid other rival nations' ships and kind of pillage on the high seas. And that's the way I like to look at salves.
So kind of diving into remote reconnaissance, we're going to be discussing a few of the items that we kind of look for before going on site. So one of the most important things with social media is lots of people like to share their first day at work, which includes their badge whenever they start. So I can't tell you the amount of people that I see share their badges all the time that are just like former friends or something along those lines. They share them on social media, and it's just very common for people to have their social media public. So we could take that information and even start prepping the badges ahead of time before even going on site. Another thing that you kind of want to look at from satellite images is seeing if there's other tenants, seeing if it's gated, looking at what those other tenants are and kind of where they are in the building, and understanding where the one that we are authorized to be testing is in the actual building itself. I will say with satellite recon, you don't want to go based off of that image because Google Images does not update all the time. So there could be an image from 2018, and maybe they've had a lot of renovations since then. And so there's different entry points, but you still want to kind of take that data, formulate the plan based off of those entry points that you see online, but then still whenever you're on site, grab new data as well. And we're kind of going to go on that when we go through the on-site reconnaissance slides, but start formulating the A, B, and C plans based off of what you find online about the company. And another thing that is important, and can we go next slide? So this is a stock image. Just want to make that clear. So this is an example of what I would do prior to going on site from that satellite image is mapping out every single entry point because once we are inside, we need to know the way to actually get out as well. And then also understanding with the parking lot, is there a lot of employee cars? And so that kind of used to be the thing that we could kind of take into account before, but now we really have to confirm with COVID now, a lot of people work remote. It's also useful if you want to ask, say the client, hey, is everyone working remote? Is it half and half? To just kind of get an idea, but you'll see that once you're on site based off the employee cars.
So that kind of segues into on-site reconnaissance. And this one's not nearly as heavy as you might assume. Most of the heavy lifting gets done with the remote reconnaissance. A lot of on-site reconnaissance actually ends up being kind of confirming what you discovered during the remote reconnaissance. So you're mostly confirming and identifying the entry points, exit points. You're confirming the dress code that you already kind of observed, and you're confirming the badge information that you've already observed. Most of the time, you're able to discover badges through various means. But of course, if no badge information was discovered, then that's going to be your priority. That's going to be your mission number one, is finding out a place to kind of sit and observe that type of thing, because you really need to get that narrowed down. Even if you're doing something as simple as a tailgate, oftentimes the scenario calls for you to have a badge that at least looks like you belong there. Of course, you're also kind of, from a distance in a parking lot, kind of trying to see what are the most used exits and entrances. Where do the employees tend to go most of the time? Where's the break section? And then, of course, you're also kind of trying to get a feel for the kind of the culture, the security awareness. Is it everyone kind of heads down one at a time, scanning in and walking in through one specific door or multiple doors? Or do they kind of have more of a little casual culture where one person scans in, holds the door open for a group of people after lunch? You're kind of trying to get a feel for that, and that's going to kind of help you hone in on what the most viable course of action would be. And of course, if you have a drone, now's your chance. Savannah has something to say about drones.
So if you want to, yeah. So you want to make sure it's obviously registered, and obviously having the license associated with it is, or make sure you have that as well. And so with on-site reconnaissance, being able to leverage the drone so you don't have to get as close to the building, you can use that drone. You really cannot hear one once they're so high up in the air, and you're able to zoom in from that drone so you can kind of get an idea of where employees are going in and out, and seeing if there's any changed areas of the building, if it got renovated or something along those lines. So that's why I see the drone as the most useful, because you could literally be here, and then depending on how far you have them that go, usually they go more than a mile. I don't know the exact amount of how far they will go, but no one would see you physically if you're using a drone to do that on-site reconnaissance.
Purchase soon enough. My go-to tool is this ultra zoom camera. It's the Nikon Coolpix P1000. I love this one. It's been great. It's got 125 times optical zoom. When I first made the purchase, I wanted to go ahead and kind of double check and make sure that it was going to fulfill the purpose that I bought it for, which is mostly sitting in a far back spot in a parking lot, or an entirely different parking lot, as far away as possible. But I wanted to see what kind of distance I could really capture. So if you can see, that little speck there in the center of the image is a friend of mine on the sidewalk, and I'm on top of my apartment complex. And I was trying to decide if I was going to return this thing. I did not return it. It zoomed right into that thing. It captured the badge. I felt so sure about my investment. And that, sure enough, has been the go-to tool. I've tried out a lot of other, kind of things that you might instinctually think to carry. Let me bring binoculars, maybe a monocular. But the issue is that you can't take what you see and put it in the report, which is really kind of a deal breaker. And then the second thing is, even if you have the badge in your mind, it doesn't translate when you really start to get it down on a paper, and you're missing some of the key details. So really, the camera is kind of the only way to go, and it's definitely my go-to tool.
So kind of diving into initial access. So these three doors are kind of standing for the three different methods that we can use for initial access itself. So the first method that we have is social engineering, or something along the lines of tailgating. Second door is going to be surreptitious entry. And the third door is going to be authenticated entry, which is related to badge cloning. So the first item we're going to be discussing is social engineering. So these are a few of the examples of badges that I have from over the years. Obviously, there's been some changes over time.
Looks like Savannah's been penetration testing since she was like 15. It looks like a little timeline.
So kind of diving in of how we actually create the badges. I used to think it was probably a lot more complex than it is. You want to go to the next slide? So all you really need is a hotel key card, or if you're going to be writing credentials to a card based off of whatever badge reader it is, you want to have, so if it was like low frequency, you'd want to get that hit prox card, you'd write that data to it, and then you put the information for the badge on that. So you just need a PVC card punch, sticker paper, Gorilla tape, and then a knife and an X-Acto knife. So essentially you're taking that sticker paper, printing out the badge on that paper, and then you're putting the tape over it. And the tape is to make it look glossy. And then so once you have that on there and it's kind of smoothed out, you want to cut it out and you're going to place that on the badge. And then to get those exact edges, then you use the X-Acto knife. And so whenever we're doing like the pre-texting or anything related to tailgating, a lot of things you want to kind of consider. What is going to be the most likely method to kind of get you in the door? Is it going to be actual employee or is it going to be a contractor? I will say with COVID, after COVID, there's things that have made things kind of different when we're on site doing the physicals. Usually I would say we've seen a shift to where in the past it was really easy to impersonate an employee, but now it's getting easier to impersonate a contractor because there's not that many people on site. And so you really kind of stand out if you're trying to impersonate an actual employee. Another thing you want to kind of take into account is what would be the next, like best time of day. So making sure you kind of evaluate whenever you're on site of whenever people are going inside and along those lines. Whenever you're coming prepared, you want to make sure anything that you want to bring inside you do have, and making sure you have those timestamps associated with whenever you're going in and out, because you need to be able to kind of relay that information for logging it and relaying it to the client. One helpful thing is whenever you're doing like the pretext, if you want to have an impersonation of someone, you could maybe send text from another number, like have a colleague text you, change that, like their number in your phone to say, I don't know, Bill's AC or something like that. And be like, yeah, this is my boss. Like he said this, and having that like kind of writing or having fake documents that say, yep, I'm supposed to be here. Like, I don't know what you guys want. Like this is supposed to be here. And then Ari's kind of going to the last area on that slide.
It's the way that I phrase this, but you do want to stay loosey-goosey, you know, that's the key there, is that you want to be prepared to get turned away, prepare for pushback, prepare yourself. And that's the trickiest part, you know, that's the hardest part of this whole thing, is kind of running into resistance. Anyone can kind of tailgate in and kind of duck off into a bathroom, but when you get a little bit of pushback, that's when you find out what you're made out of. But if you go in with a plan and you have a contingency plan, you know, have a plan for getting turned down. Just the key with that, and that's the way I kind of phrase it, is always never be the guy who knows what's going on. Be the guy who's waiting on the guy who knows what's going on. That's what I've used countless times. I'm, you know, coming in and I'm there to repair the frozen coils, the HVAC. And then when I get a little bit of pushback, it's, oh, well, I don't actually know what needs to be repaired in here. I'm waiting on my supervisor to get here. I got here 15 minutes early. He's not picking up his phone. I figured I'd come in and try to get an idea from you guys where I'm supposed to be headed. The key there is that if you have that contingency plan built in, you shouldn't really ever get backed into a corner so badly that you do have to reveal your LOA. Most of the time you can get away with saying, okay, I don't know what's going on. You're not budging. I will go ahead and go out to the parking lot, or I will take off and wait for my supervisor to get here, something along those lines. And that allows you to escape. I've been turned away countless times, but I've never had to reveal my LOA. That's the key there.
So this next slide kind of shows 3 different kind of ideas that you could leverage for pretexting or tailgating. So the first one that Ari has up here is a picture of him impersonating a contractor, as you can tell. The second image kind of relates to one of those badges that I just showed in a couple slides back. The wig that I had on was based off of the location that we were going to. There was nobody blonde. So we were like, well, we have to buy a wig because there is nobody blonde and you will stand out if you don't get a wig. So it's a very interesting expense process, but yes, I did buy a wig. I did not cut my hair and dye it the color that was in that photo. The third image is in relating to kind of tailgating behind someone or having someone kind of let you in. So leveraging a bunch of coffees that are in your hand, or if you have a very large box, usually people really want to help other people whenever you're coming in. Like no one's just gonna slam the door right in your face. They're gonna try to hold that door open. And once you go in behind them, you can say, yep, I'm just gonna go take this to whatever area you wanna say you're taking it to. So that's kind of what those 3 images relate to.
Yeah, in reference to that first image, that's one of my many costumes. You might think to yourself, as a physical penetration tester, you probably use a lot of costumes. And you're right, that is something that I do. Most of the time when I get a client, I do try to see if they have an external facing store. That makes things really easy. Most of the time that's a really great way to do it, because you'll just blend in immediately with their outfits and their accoutrement. And then, of course, you do have the high-vis shirts for if there's any kind of construction, even adjacent, even near it. Amazon Prime vests. I mean, there's lots of different ways to kind of look the part. And this is an image of me looking the part, just backwards hat, no credentials. I wasn't trying to blend in with them. There weren't enough employees to blend in with. But some random construction adjacent fellow, I was able to walk around visible. So talking about surreptitious entry, this is my personal favorite. If it's an option, I find it to usually be the best one. It is the option that is the most quickly ruled out, however. Most of the time, if a client does not own the facility, the biggest thing is that it's most of the time just completely out of scope to be able to get in with physical tools on the outside of the building in order to get to the client floor that you're penetration testing. So that's kind of the issue. It's something that gets ruled out quickly, but if it is in scope and it is available, it's one of the best options, and mostly because of some of the advantages. You know, most of the time that you are getting into a facility late at night, there's not going to be, any staff. Sometimes there's very few staff or maintenance staff, and it's just that much easier to kind of blend in and just go in, and you're not really going to get the same amount of pushback. So if you use some of these tools to get in, you're going to kind of have the place to yourself, and that of course opens up to all sorts of abilities in terms of post-exploitation. You can connect to a network jack and kind of take your time in a little break room. You're just not going to run into anybody, so it comes in handy. Of course, the disadvantages are intuitive. If you get caught on site 3 a.m. And no one knew you were supposed to be there, or you do trip an alarm that you didn't know you did, things can escalate very quickly with surreptitious entry. It's probably going to involve police officers and kind of those higher echelons of engagement. So that is the major disadvantage, but I do love it. And these are some of my favorite tools. They're not always what you might think I would use. The go-to tool is the double door tool, of course, with those double doors. If there's a crack at all, most of the time the double door tool can handle it. And that's made even easier with the kind of newest addition, this little wedge pump. This thing is fantastic. If you've never used this gets you those extra critical millimeters that it takes in order to get that double door tool in. And this one's probably made the difference about 3 or 4 times now for me since I got it. So it's been fantastic. Then of course you have the shims, the mica shims. Those are also, it's just such a common issue to have a loadable door. And of course the traveler hook and the shims address that issue. And then I only have a little Bogota lockpicks on there, mostly because I can't speak for everyone here, but my lock sport personally isn't to the level that I can walk up to an external door and pick up 5, 6 pin, in any kind of reasonable amount of time. I try to keep up with it, but I just have come to find that that's not a very realistic thing to do when you're actually trying to get in. It just takes longer than you would think. The Bogotas are great because number one, they're incredibly compact, of course, but they're also kind of all you need to just quickly rake a cabinet or a drawer, something that you kind of, seems like it might have something interesting inside of it, but you just don't have the amount of time really to sit there and like go after a 6-pin lock. So I don't carry many more than that. I have a Peterson kit. It's gorgeous. It's leather, but I just don't use it. It's not as realistic as I thought it would be. Then of course, let's talk about the under the door tool. I hate that tool so much. It's so loud. It's really difficult to store in any kind of way. It's kind of always stretching out whatever you put it inside. And then of course you do have to take the time and bend it out really, really straight in order to get any kind of precision from it. And of course, if someone is on the other side of that door, you're done. You're going to jail. I mean, it's over for you. There's no way to talk yourself out of using that tool. So I hate it, but I carry it with me all the time. And sometimes it is.
And then one more that is not up there is the J tool. So kind of the doors that you see where you can turn that lock on the other side. So if there is an air gap in that door, we can insert this tool in. It'll latch on to that lock, and we just start turning it, and it will start unlocking that door essentially. So say if there's a badge reader on that door, but we're able to lock it, unlock it, and kind of pull it. And say if there's the rec sensor. So if we can set off that rec sensor with a can of air, and then we can pull on that door, because usually they'll have the badge reader, but then in addition to badge reader, they'll have the that like physical lock as well. But so then we can bypass it with the physical lock with that, and then set off the rec sensor with a can of air.
Now, of course, with surreptitious entry, that doesn't mean that pretexts aren't still at play. As you can see this picture here, this is one of my go-tos. This is my Otis elevator repair hat. Otis has an external facing store, and all of the products are like really high quality. It's like good clothing. And then I also have my my classic proletariat jacket there as well. So that is not only really, really helpful in carrying the tools and concealing what I'm trying to bring with me, but it's also really, really helpful when I do get stopped by a security guard and I still have a pretext kind of ready to go. I'm here for the elevators. And then, of course, if you are in a situation where you can't have a jacket or you're trying to look for some other way of carrying the tools that you're going to need to get in, just bring a tool bag. That's an easy one. That one's like $18, and that one is really fantastic at just carrying some of those extra items because, like I said, some of these are really large. The double door tool, that's probably about yay, and then the under the door tool, nightmare.
It's a similar size to this right here.
Yeah, yeah. So then we'll talk about authenticated entry.
So kind of diving into this, obviously this is really helpful if we are able to get a badge clone. But like I was kind of mentioning earlier with COVID, there's not a lot of employees on site. Like I think the last few physicals that I've done, there's probably less than 10 people. And so when you're getting those 10 people, they're not going in and out a lot. You get close to them, they're like, who are you? What are you doing? Why are you keeping asking me for so many directions? But if that's not the case, because there are some companies that obviously have all the employees back and we can get that badge clone, it's kind of like devastating basically for the company because then we can kind of go in at any time of the day. And when you have the authenticated credentials to get in, it just makes everything just a lot easier.
Of course, a lot of clients do monitor those types of things and they do get alerts when someone, badges in from a stairwell or something like that. So you do want to kind of keep that in mind as well. But most of the time, yeah, it does give you an unprecedented level of access and ease to enter because then you're not relying on internal doors to server closets or server rooms as being loitable or something like that. You can just badge in and hopefully you have something that has the level of credentials to allow you to get inside that interior door.
And with that being said too, a lot of times I've seen this more often now is people will have the images associated with those employees that once you scan that badge, security guard will see who comes up. And there was a time where we had cloned someone's badge and the person I'd cloned was a male and looked nothing like me. And they're just like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why it's coming up, but he like genuinely believed I was an employee and just thought it was like a malfunction in the system. But then like they pulled one of the other guys, was like, you get out of here. She's a real employee, not you guys.
That's how good she is. It's devastating. She can't be stopped.
So a lot of the factors that we kind of consider whenever we're doing the badge cloning, there's different frequencies. So there's low and there's high frequency. We're going to go into detail on the next few slides. And then there's the chipsets that's associated with the readers and the format as well is important. So you can't really look at a badge reader and say, hey, I know this is XYZ. There's the components I kind of just mentioned that you have to take into account to identify what kind of badge reader is and what kind of technology they're using.
I think it's useful to kind of go over a little bit of the history and the kind of the timeline with badge technology because you're still going to see so many things very much common and used by clients. So of course, in the 1980s, the mag stripe was introduced, and this was actually mostly just to kind of address the issues with manual keys as far as key management and logistics and kind of traceability. So that was introduced. And of course, the mag stripe isn't any kind of encryption. It's just swipe. It's read by the reader, and you see exactly what's going on there. And then in the 1990s, the Prox card was introduced to address the one major issue that the mag stripe had, and that was the fact that these larger corporations were going through so many of these because it was just getting worn down. So they had to keep replacing them. So the Prox card was introduced to address pretty much just that kind of the wear and tear and constant replacing of these cards. And so it does transmit with the low frequency. That's the 125 kilohertz RFID. And the big thing here is that it's just kind of just burping out an ID number and the facility code. It's unencrypted, it's static and it's read in the clear because it just doesn't have the storage capacity for any kind of security features. Then of course in the 2000s, the smart cards were introduced, and this did address a lot of those issues. It transmits on the high frequency, the 13.56 megahertz near field communication. And this one utilizes mutual authentication. So this was a pretty giant leap in terms of clonability and the issues there. So the keys are stored both on the credential itself, the card or the fob, and then the reader as well. And then the big issue here was that the first gen cards had exposed vulnerabilities in their authentication algorithms, and so that kind of tore them down to the point where they were again clonable. Then, of course, in the 2010s, the second generation smart cards were introduced, and these were kind of moving away from proprietary protocols and kind of eliminating a lot of those blind spots, kind of addressing some of those issues by introducing standards like NIST and ISO. And so that kind of was addressing a lot of the weaknesses of the prior generations. And then as we kind of go into transcendence, both the present and the future, you're starting to see a lot of the more mature and advanced clients kind of moving away from credentials in the physical form in the first place, and they have them on their phones, on an app. And so we're kind of seeing a slow but kind of sure move away from just having a card or a badge that's kind of hanging from your neck. This looks like a nightmare. I know that. It's a big old block quote. I'm not going to read it, but I did put it in there for posterity's sake when you review the PDF. But it is a really helpful quote, and it kind of explaining to me why I was having such a hard time with my original goal, which was to be able to get to a point where I could eyeball a badge reader and know exactly what to go grab, what it's operating. I wanted to just kind of eyeball it and know. And there's a reason why I will never get to that point. No one will, because there is an intentional obfuscation between what the reader is capable of and what the credential is actually running in terms of format and chipset. So that quote helped out a lot that I got from the HIT white paper. So when we are looking at a badge reader, what are we able to tell from your average badge reader? Not a lot. So most of the time you do have that little section at the bottom that has maybe the client name or nothing at all, or Johnson Controls, or just multi-class SEs, you have the name there, but that's not giving you a lot. All we could tell from something like this is that, okay, it's probably a migration reader based just on kind of history and kind of what's common. And so it probably is running both low frequency and high frequency, and the company is kind of trying to move away from low frequency, but maybe that's still in play. Of course, there's different ways of seeing if it's low frequency or high frequency. You have the dangerous things card. You can just hold it up. You do have the prox grind. That's another good one. Or if you take this stuff as seriously as Savannah and I, you go ahead and get implants in our arms that can tell high frequency, low frequency, and then I have a T5577 chipset in my hand. And that was a good choice, I think. I'm pretty excited about it.
And so with that with that chip, so this is a flipper. I'm sure most of you guys in the room kind of know what that is. So if we were to read this data where it's on our hand, it just picks it up. So we can write data to it, and essentially we can use it to authenticate if we really wanted to, but typically really haven't had the chance to yet.
If we really wanted to. If for some reason, the situation called for us to not have a badge that looked like theirs, but instead wave our hand in front of the reader and the door opens, I don't know when I'm going to use that. So maybe party favor? Yeah, maybe.
They will probably think that we're
still
from
so cool to have, especially in this community.
So kind of going into the frequency types, the two biggest differentiators from the two frequencies is low frequency is obviously very insecure and is operating as unencrypted. And high frequency is more secure, but there's still some technologies that are in use that are affected by vulnerabilities that allow us to still clone them. So we're going to go into more detail about that, but basically the lower frequency technology is just cheaper to implement, and it's just still very common because lots of times it's a very big expense to kind of replace everybody's badge cards and get new ones and kind of replace the readers at all the locations for an organization.
So here are the two go-tos that we use, especially at Optiv. That's our low frequency HIT-Prox, MaxiProx reader. And then we also have the R90 I-class reader. Both are really, really handy. I'd say we also have an Indala reader, but that's more popular and I think more common in Europe. I haven't used one yet, but these are usually the go-to. And of course, as Savannah has mentioned, post-COVID, it's a whole other thing. It's really, really difficult to see enough of a population to be able to kind of flow in and around them, get close enough to get the scan. So, once upon a time, you would see a couple of employees that you knew were part of the client, and you would just kind of try to time you walking up, right beside them. And of course, you'd have the reader inside of your satchel, and you would just try to kind of walk as close to them as possible, maybe just kind of get the read, and then you would verify the read later on. Or sometimes you'd kind of come up with a pretext and you'd be like, hey guys, hey, where's this? Or, kind of give them the old 1-2 and kind of discuss something with them so that you can get close enough to them, because you have to be so close. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say that contact has to be made with the satchel, especially the ones that we use. It's, maybe it's not quite contact, but you're talking about a negligible gap there. And then I guess you disappear. But that has become so much harder post-COVID, just like I said, because of the populations just not being there. So it's not usually the viable option that it once was. It used to be the first kind of resort that we would go with is try to get the badge clone. And now there are other ways.
So kind of giving an example of how we kind of set this up. So on the left side, it kind of shows the reader opened up. And so basically we kind of reconfigure the reader with a Raspberry Pi. And then we have We Gotcha, which is on GitHub. And it essentially acts as an access point to whenever we power up that badge reader. So on the left side, that's a 20-volt battery. So if you try to plug in a battery that's less than 20 volts, it may seem like it's on and operating and working. But essentially, like it needs at least that 20 volts. I think that that's like the lowest because essentially, I don't know off the top of my head what like it's supposed to be operating at, but 20 volts is the lowest, and it will like run at that method. But it's supposed to be operating at a higher voltage. But that's what's on the left side right there. And so that kind of shows how close you need to be on the right side of the image. And so essentially, once we kind of get close enough, so say if this is like a person, and we're right here, we can see that it gets that read. And then we can take that ID number and a facility code and the Proxmark hex and kind of take that data. And we want to make sure we get multiple reads because I think Ari had mentioned earlier that if you don't do the one read, then you really need to have the two because if you can't verify, so say if it didn't pick it up all the way and you leave, and you're like, oh, I got the read. And then you leave and you're like, wow, I did not get the read fully. And then that kind of sucks because you've already left and you missed your opportunity.
Same rules as a beacon, 2 is 1, 1 is done. So of course, when it comes to writing the credentials that you then capture, you do have a lot of options, especially if you're just kind of looking into kind of take a turn into the hobbyist side of these things. You have a big range as far as expense. You have the world's cheapest reader ever that you guys have probably seen when you try to first clone your pool fob. This is a good one. This is probably sub $10. And then of course, luckily now the Proxmark 3 has been around long enough to where it's kind of come down in price. So that's a pretty accessible one. And then, of course, you have it's more complex, the Proxmark 3 RDV4 with the Bluetooth module and the battery module. So that one's infinitely usable nowadays. And then, as we pointed out, the Flipper Zero. If you can get your hands on one, you guys might know it's still tough to get a hold of, but if you can, that's a great tool that is it's got nothing but potential in terms of development from the community. And then there's this newest one, the iCopy XS. That's an upgrade that I actually recently made because I did find that some of its abilities just made my job a little bit easier, and that's what I'm all about on site there.
So this is kind of an example of how easy, so with the low frequency technology that we mentioned that a lot of organizations still use, you'll probably spend more time powering up your computer than writing that data to an actual card. So once we get that read and we get that YGAN format of the card, we literally, all you have to do is type in LF HID clone. So if it's like a HID prox card and you're entering in that YGAN format and it writes it to that card. And then once you write it, you want to make sure it's actually reading it in whatever data you wrote to. So you can pick it up with LF search, which is essentially searching for that low frequency card. And as you can see on that slide, it comes up and you just double check and cross check that it's there.
I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because it is so rarely going to be allowed on an actual engagement. But the ESP YGAN interception tool is going to be devastating if you are ever able to use it. And the biggest factor is that because it uses IPC connections, so insulation piercing contact, by definition, you are damaging the wires. And so even though you could insert this into a reader and then credentials would be transmitted directly to you via Wi-Fi, I mean, it's a great tool, but you'd really have to get up ahead with a client and make sure all the way up and down the command chain understands that you are damaging a reader and you're really waiting on someone to say like, hey, throw anything you have at me. I'm ready for it. I want to see what an attacker could do, would do, and still get ahead of it and say, I'm damaging your wires. It's going to be damaged. I've never been able to use one on a real project, but I'm waiting for that moment. I have it ready to go. It will be cool if that day ever comes. When it comes to key terms, the terms do get a little bit confusing, and especially when you're kind of trying to explain it to a client, you're kind of trying to use the same nomenclature. There is a little bit of fuzz there as far as what means what. So I just wanted to throw this in here quickly to cover the fact that the card credentials refer to the actual method of authentication, so the card or fob. The chipsets are actually, that's the word that you would use to discuss, the procs or iClass, MyFair, Indala. So that is actually referring more specifically to the chipset. And then you have the card format. And this is usually going to come into play if the client sets you in front of the management console, maybe perhaps on a walkthrough to go over mitigation techniques. And this is the one where you're going to be able to explain to them that the format that they see on their side, similar to like a phone number, wouldn't make sense unless it was described as a phone number, and then you would be able to parse it like this is the area code, so and that sort of thing. So that's the biggest trick that I found in discussing it with the client, is kind of getting all of these words kind of agreed upon, and then you can discuss how to mitigate whatever findings that you discovered. So I just wanted to also throw this in there, a couple of common clonable card types. Some of these are more famous than others. A lot of you probably walked in here already knowing about the classic magic card, the 1K, with its rewritable UID sector. So these are just some of the classic ones. The T5577 chipset is the one that comes in my hand here. This is the next chip from Dangerous Things, and that's the one I have here. So this is capable of a couple of different things, but the T5577 is probably the most common you'll see.
So kind of going through the differences between iClass and iClass SE. So essentially with the original iClass, there was a master key that was leaked. So essentially we can leverage that to decrypt the data. And with the new iClass SE, there's an option to have the legacy iClass enabled. And a lot of the times people don't realize they have it enabled. So if that is enabled, then it will we can get it to fall back and leverage that legacy iClass, and then use that to write those credentials to a card. So that's like a lot of things that we kind of see when someone does have the iClass SE, that's pretty common, that we can pick up the legacy iClass and then leverage that master key to decrypt the data that we pick up on one of the readers that we have configured, and then we can take it and write it to a card. Just kind of going into post-exploitation. So the three really important things that I really try to stress with everybody who's doing physicals. First thing is evidence, kind of making sure you have those timestamps. So whenever you went in and out, I know I mentioned that earlier in the presentation, and always making sure that you're taking photos of whatever you're accessing, wherever you were, because you want to be able to kind of, it goes into the next part, show the impact. This isn't, we're not doing these engagements to show like a quick win. We're doing these engagements to show what would happen if somebody actually wanted to get in, because I know sometimes people don't think that, oh, this like really wouldn't kind of happen, but there are people that like try to do this and try to get into large organizations that, say if they're like publicly traded or something along those lines, because they have a lot on the line if someone was able to get like data from them, because sometimes on-site perspective is way easier than trying to breach them remotely. And so also before you're going on site, you kind of want to establish the goal with the client of what they want to establish once we're inside. Do they want us to drop a payload on the network and establish that external access from like a C2 infrastructure standpoint, or they just want us to get access to a certain room, or just network access in general by plugging into an Ethernet jack, or just entry itself. And so whenever you're egressing out, if you're at a point where you feel like you're stuck and you can't push any more than what you have, it's better to egress out than push and get caught, because it's more successful if you're able to get in and out versus you trying to push to the point of wherever you try to leave and then someone picks it up because you just kept on pushing, just trying to do more stuff than needed.
So kind of a summary, but then also kind of like maybe a key takeaway or something that you might describe to someone who is about to embark on their first physical pen test. The three main things that I kind of try to tell anyone who maybe shadows me or is kind of taking a look is, take your time. Don't rush the stages. Don't rush the on-site recon. That's a really classic one to be like, okay, well, we got what we need. Let's just go. Don't rush that. Kind of take your time, get a feel for the comings and goings and the culture, and kind of take your time on all of those stages. Don't rush through any of it. There's nothing to really be gained from rushing. Get into character. Try your best to become that actor. Identify your motives as a character. If you're an HVAC guy, you're just there to do your job, you're casual, you're just kind of matter of fact perhaps, and just kind of really try to get in there and focus on being that person so that when you do get pushed back or something does come up, you are that character. That's the real key there. And of course that does take a little bit more talent and comfortability, but that will come if you really try to focus on it. And then remember your LOA. This is a kind of a two-level point. I do mean literally remember your LOA, like have your LOA, put it in your back pocket and also put it in your backpack. Every once in a while, there's a little nightmare story of an LOA getting provided and then getting taken elsewhere. Have multiple copies on you. But the second level that I mean is remember your LOA. Remember you have a letter of authorization. Use that knowledge to make yourself more comfortable and relaxed so that when you're interacting, you're not coming across as nervous and like feeling like you're breaking the law. You are there to do the job that you were hired to do. And so that should help you really calm down and just know that you're there. Nothing's going to happen, very likely.
I will say with the LOA too, I know Ari said like back pocket. I think he meant front pocket because you don't want to try to pull something from your back pocket because a security guard may think that you're pulling something else.
Yeah.
So have it in your front pocket. Do not put it in your back pocket.
That's a good point. You want it right here. Don't hide away anything. Yes. Of course, there have to be acknowledgements because there are so many different both people and sites where I get this information and kind of try to get a feel for the tools that we use, all of that sort of thing. So to all of these people, thank you so much.